One quick sound check.
One quick sound check.
One quick sound check. Hi everyone, this is Carter Bowman IV and you're listening to The Journey fuck's sake. Hi everybody, this is Carter Bowman IV and you're listening to The Journey podcast with Russell Hewes.
Hey guys, and welcome back to The Journey podcast. I'm joined again today by Steve.
Hi Russ.
Hi Steve, how are you?
I'm very well.
Good. And this is our third episode of the podcast. We're talking about the journey. In the first two episodes, we were discussing, the early formative years of my life and trying to give a bit of insight and a bit of structure to the podcast. And we thought that this week would be a perfect time to introduce our first guest. And I thought me and Steve were talking and we thought, why not bring someone that we know very well? One of my best friends that I grew up with, someone who I've known for a very long time, had a very interesting life, varied career. And his name is Carter Bowman, also known as Buster.
Hello Russ mate, you all right?
Yeah, I'm all good. How are you?
I am good indeed, ready to get cracking.
Good. Glad to hear it. So just for our listeners, we just thought we'd give a little bit of insight in case this is someone's first episode. So the Journey podcast is, the idea came about from me wanting to try and give back to the community and give back to sort of society by giving some insight into my own journey, but then also using sort of the wealth of friendships and contacts that I have to give insight into other people's journeys, and hopefully that can be used as a tool for young people or anyone in life looking for a bit of inspiration or looking for a change of career. And Steve is obviously here to sort of help guide us along that journey and also to grab those golden bits of those golden nuggets of wisdom, I should say. So I guess let's start off. What are you doing? What are you doing right now? Man,
now,
that busy.
So now I work for Barclays Bank. I work as a communications expert in Canary Wharf. I only started there in September of last year.
So this is all pre-corona.
Yeah, just before Corona, I started an internship in September through to December. And then managed to land myself a role in the communications department for Barclays UK. So essentially, if you go to the shop and you buy a tin of Coca-Cola, like I work for the department that does all of the processes for that and the communications for those processes.
Okay, cool.
Simply put, really.
Yeah, no, that's very good. So how did you get into that job? I guess is probably the first question I would ask.
Sure, yeah. Comes from a bit of a varied and diverse sort of career in my life, but I actually left the military in December of last year.
Is this the British Army? The
British Army, yeah. So,
okay.
So a bit of a crossover, and I'll explain in terms of, I started in Barclays in September, but didn't leave the Army until December. So the way it works is there's a program for transitioning military veterans called the After Program in Barclays, and it's like 3 months of unpaid internship work in Barclays in an area in the bank that, of course, they have to agree to it first and foremost. An area in the bank that sort of is aligned with your expertise that you've got in the Army or the military, should I say, because it obviously encompasses the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, etc. And so I sort of made it vocal in a bit of an early Christmas present in 2018, actually, to myself, to be honest. I said, I'm going to leave the Army after 5 years. I've reached a bit of a fork in the road. And it's a year wait to leave the Army. So I applied throughout that period between sort of January, the new year, up to September for a multitude of different financial services and got onto the After Program. And they gave me sort of the thumbs up in July, I think. And I was, pretty buzzing about that. And then you start in September, and then essentially you ask your chain of command in the military for, a protracted period of time off.
So who was your chain of command at the stage when you left?
It's just to do with sort of my direct line managers in the military. So it was my my commanding officer at the unit that I was working at the time, which was down in near Bournemouth. It was a Royal Marine base called Poole. I was doing intelligence work because I was in the intelligence corps in the military for 5 years, which is
5 years.
It's a lot. It's a lot more. It sounds a lot more glamorous than it actually was, to be completely honest with you. But it gave me some great experiences. But in terms of Barclays, so I started in September, and it's an unpaid internship. You did it for 3 months, but I actually extended mine to 4, right up until my last paid day in the army. And about 2 weeks before my last paid day in the army, I managed to land myself a role in Barclays within the communications department, and started on the December the 30th, which was a bit of a bad joke, if you ask me. You know, starting on New Year's Eve, essentially. It was a bit of a weird time to start, but I was ecstatic nonetheless, and I started essentially in January and got straight into it.
Okay, great. I mean, you've said a couple of things there that, if you don't mind, would love to try and unpack. So one of the things that I find very interesting, and what I'm hoping that this podcast can give insight into people's careers, was, you said that your role in the army as an intelligence corps wasn't as exciting as you were expecting.
Yeah.
So, for me, this is actually one of the most important things that I hope this podcast can bring to other people. And as we carry on, inviting more guests, and hopefully you'll come and join us again sometime after this podcast, is that, why did you obviously join the army for a reason? You obviously had an idea of what it meant to join the army. And obviously I'm assuming that when you join the army, you have to make a decision on where you're going to join, the Air Force, the actual army, intelligence corps, all these different, routes that you could have taken. So, I mean, what was it that drew you to the intelligence corps? And obviously, and also, if you don't mind telling us, what were you expecting? What were you hoping? Okay. What was the life that you were expecting to lead? What was the route into that? And then what did you actually end up finding out? Because 5 years is a long time, Buster. Like you definitely committed a nice chunk of your life to that. So I think for our listeners, it would be very good to
Sure. Well, I mean, addressing the first part of your question, why did I join the intelligence corps? And the army in general, that sort of harps back to way before I'd even met you, to be honest with you, because we met each other when we were about 14 or so.
Yeah, I remember.
I remember it quite clearly as well. But it harps back to way beyond that. I'd always wanted to join the army in some sort of subconscious, deep aspect, because my father was a big historian. He loved history, and we talked about it all the time. We watched military programs all the time when I was a kid. He loved it. He used to talk to me about the Cold War and the Second World War, and we watch the World at War, the 1960s or 70s series, and I was just fascinated by it, and I always wanted to join the military. It's just I kept putting it off for years and years and years. And then I worked after the financial crash in 2008. Can I just
take you back there quickly?
Yeah.
So what I was interested in is that you had this childhood vision of joining the military.
Yeah.
And you always wanted to do it, but you kept putting it off. But what role did you think that you could play from a boyhood perspective in the military? What were you imagining?
Oh, I always thought I was just going to be a bog standard infantryman. I just sort of got really excited, just like every sort of little boy does when they're a kid, of the prospect of playing video games and stuff and kicking indoors and shooting stuff. Just what every
soldiering.
Yeah, proper soldiering. Just what every little kid really wants to do.
Okay.
I always thought that's what I was going to do. And it sort of leads in nicely as to why you're asking why intelligence. After as I was saying before, after the crash, and I shifted over my job prospects, and I sort of changed my route to go down to a teaching path. Long story short, I did several years of teaching and learning support assistant until I came to Lambeth Academy in South London near Clapham, and it actually boils down to a singular incident as to why I joined the intelligence corps, and it was essentially there was a sergeant from the infantry who came in and was doing recruitment in the schools around the area. And I was teaching history and special needs in this school. Excuse me. And this guy sat down and spoke to all of these sixth form kids and all these GCSE kids. And I was in the back with my tutor group listening to him. And he sort of finished the presentation and said, does anyone have any questions? And nobody had any questions because they're nervous kids. And I'm there just like, I've got a question. I'm itching to ask a question because I've had this in the back of my mind for years. I put my hand up and I said, look, I asked him a couple of questions. He said, let's talk offline about it. I remember very clearly, we went into the sort of the cookhouse area, into the eating area, sort of the mess hall. That's a military term, sorry, where the kids used to eat their lunch. And he sat me down and he asked me a series of questions, and I was just getting more and more into it. And he asked me sort of some very basic questions, like, do you have a degree? I said, yeah. He said, like, how old are you? I said, 26 at the time. He said, have you, what type of part of the army do you want to join? And I said, I haven't got a clue, mate. I haven't got a clue. I know that I've always wanted to go and do, as I said, kick some doors in and maybe, have a bit of that boyish childhood fun, so to speak. And he turned around and sort of said something which essentially made my decision very, very simple. And he said, look, you've got a head on your shoulders and you've got a lot of life experience. Have you ever thought about trying to become like an officer for the intelligence corps, doing military intelligence? Because you've got a lot of background experience in people skills, and you've got a history degree, and all of these different facts and details. You'd be a lot of use there. And it's sort of a bit of a light bulb moment happened then. And I also reached out to a friend of mine from university, and it turns out I knew he was in the army. It turns out he had also joined the intelligence corps, and we were doing the same course, my military history course. And so I just sort of put two and two together and sort of went like, do you know what? I'm going to give it a go. I applied. I couldn't go in as an officer. I was too old at the time, which is a bit surprising. So I went in as a soldier and never looked back. It was the best decision I could have made, because officers often tended to do a lot of sort of administrative roles, whereas the soldiers got into the nitty-gritty and did a lot of the intelligence work, which is where the real satisfying stuff sort of came from. And what did I expect? What did I expect from doing a military intelligence role? Well, I mean, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear military intelligence?
I'm thinking, all the secrets, you're getting to hear all the juicy stuff, top secret.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember when you first joined, I was like, Beezy, we're best mates. We've known each other from back in the day.
You got to tell me everything.
You got to start telling me some stuff. But, true to your word to the army, he didn't ever divulge any secrets.
That's because, it's non-disclosure agreements from, the army are pretty strong stuff, to be honest. But yeah, it's just like that. Just like you said, I was expecting it to sort of have almost, without sounding sort of super cheesy, I know some people will probably have a good smile on their face if they hear this, but you expect it to be like sort of like James Bond, Jason Bourne-esque. You hear intelligence and you think, ooh, wow, fancy, yeah, you're going to do all this top secret stuff. It's going to be all, hush hush and only only for certain ears only. And it is in that aspect, not the James Bond bit, but it is very quiet, and they keep everything to themselves, and you're not allowed to sort of disclose any information. But my expectation certainly was not met, but my expectation management sort of developed over some time as to what I thought my next roles or my next postings would be after spending just a little bit of time in the basic training. I thought it was. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No. It's just that you've given a lot of detail about how much you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And then you've said after a while you thought maybe it was time to think of something else.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite a big step.
Mm.
So what would be really interesting, I mean, first of all, one simple question: did you have to sign the Official Secrets Act?
Yeah.
You did. So that's useful for people to know. The next question is what triggered. Sorry, not what triggered. How did you move from being immersed in this role to feeling that the role itself wasn't providing you with the challenges that you thought you needed?
Okay, so when I first started, you pass out and you become an accredited operator of military intelligence once you've done all your training. So you do like 14 weeks in basic training, then you 6 months, I think, something like that, over in Chicksands in Bedfordshire, doing all the intelligence work, blah, 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 yada, yada. And then you pass out. That's you. Stamp, signed, sealed, delivered. You're now an operator of military intelligence in the British Army. Done. Sounds a lot cooler than it is, as I was saying before. And I went to Colchester. So in Colchester is Merville Barracks. So it's the home of the Parachute Regiment. So anyone listening probably will have heard of them. They're one of the most famous regiments in the British Army, throwing themselves out of planes, all of that good stuff. And that was a privilege. That was a privilege for me to go there, because it was, in the pyramid of where they slotted people in. That was sort of one down from the top the top being sort of British Special Forces. As to where you could go and do intelligence for. And I was stoked. I was like, yes, I've managed to do something right in training to get myself into this position where I'm doing it for the infamous parachute regiment. It was great. I loved it. I went there and I did loads of intelligence work from a tactical to an operational level, and I did everything you can think of from the military in terms of sleeping in a hole in the floor whilst eating cold rations, to going to big tents with loads of people running around very frantically, to going to different operations room with big screens. And it was all that sort of stuff that you would sort of picture in like a young man's mind of the army in its entirety. And it was so much fun. It was so fun. I was there for 3.5 years. It was so much fun. I loved it. I see a lot of the guys that I worked with there on a regular basis. We had a Zoom meeting the other day just to keep up, to touch base and just to have chats, and had a couple of beers over the phone. Loved it. 3.5 years, bang. Then I managed to sort of, again, did something right when I was in Colchester. They sort of promoted me and sent me to do intelligence work in support of British Special Forces from a base down in near Bournemouth in Poole. And that was like top level stuff. But when I got there, this is where that twist, that change happened in me that you were asking about. It was a lot more, I'm not going to say serious, but it was a lot more... or I can't even say boring either, because it was very interesting work. It's just the vibe and the place and the people didn't quite sit as well as what I just experienced. And I guess actually in a way I was a bit sort of jealous, and not jealous, as I missed my time in Colchester.
So do you think it sort of was lacking that excitement that you'd had before?
Definitely.
So do you, was that, do you think because you'd maybe, I'm assuming the whole army's mature, but did you suddenly enter this place that's a little bit more serious, a little bit more, there's not as many young people maybe, it's a lot more, structured, less freedom, I guess, to kind of be your own individual self, which I know the army's not keen on as an overall thing, but do you think that might have been it? Because obviously you're getting a promotion, but actually, what does that mean in the army? Does that mean more isolation? Does that mean now you've got more responsibility, so you can't actually enjoy all of the reasons that you actually initially joined for?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, what does that say for my maturity, I guess, sort of from the first point, really, that I went there and they were being very serious time, and I was like, crossed my arms and threw my toys out the pram, but not really. But yeah, of course, when you get promoted, the level of as you increase in seniority in the military, and my experience is very limited because I only went up to corporal, which is not very high up at all, but the more responsibility is placed on your shoulders, and that sort of, it settles you down in terms of solidifies you in one place, rather than having that more exciting aspect of being able to go out to the field and do these things and do all those exciting things. And there wasn't any of that there. Yeah. And I guess that's what I missed. And I looked at the options available, and I saw, as I said at the beginning, I saw a fork, and it became very clear to me. I saw a fork in the road. I said, once I've finished here, I'm either going to go to become promote to maybe a sergeant and go and look after a team of, 5-10 people, and sort of nurse them through their beginning stages of becoming intelligence experts. But it's going to be me sitting down in an office somewhere in North Yorkshire, in Catterick, or maybe in Bulford or something like that, just the two sort of big super bases for the army in the UK, and sort of babysitting, if you know what I mean, because I would have had more experience, so they would expect me as a sergeant to impart that knowledge onto the younger ones, or the new recruits, the new soldiers, or it was find myself a new career, because at that point, when I sort of had that sort of light bulb, that fork moment, I was about 30, and I was like, right, you're getting on a bit. So what do? Do you go up that road and stay in the military for what's probably going to be several more years, probably like another decade, or you find something new? And I chose the latter, to find something new, because I was like, I've got such a wealth of experience and knowledge here that I can use in other areas, and I know that it's not going to be nowhere near as exciting, but it's definitely a good leg to stand on, and I've got loads of transferable skills, which was probably the biggest thing I gained out of the army, is just the amount of qualifications and transferable skills that I got from it.
Could you list some of them? So what if what do you put on your CV from coming out of the army in terms of the kind of skills and experiences that you've acquired?
So, I mean, you've probably seen on LinkedIn, you know, the Chartered Management Institute. You've heard of them? So the CMI, they do sort of like different levels of management qualifications that are recognised by the majority of employers. Now, of course, if anyone listens to this from the military, they'll realise that a CMI, the level that I got for being a corporal, people don't see it as being this sort of like, oh my God, you're a manager, you've got this qual stamp, bang, you must know everything, not in the slightest. But from leaving, for an individual, say a young man who's just done 5-6 years, who went in when they were 18 and they come out with the same qualifications, that stamp on their CV is fantastic. They've got a chartered, like an accredited management like qualification on there. Not only that, but I had an NVQ, like a first year of university, I think what it is, level 4, I think something like that. NVQ in intelligence and security studies. There was an option, but I never actually did it, to go and do essentially heavily subsidized, if not some aspects of it were free, degree. I could have got that. I didn't do that because I already had one and I had other things that I wanted to do. But I could have, that would have been that it was there on the table to actually pick up and do it. I don't actually really know why I didn't do it now, to be honest with you, but that was several years ago when I first had the option available. I had several intelligence and security studies qualifications. I think about 3, this management qualification, the potential for a degree. And that's just from 4 or 5 years of one particular trade. Now imagine what you can get if you stayed in for 20 years and you jump from trade to trade. You see what I mean?
No, it sounds impressive.
Yeah, it's like there is, despite what some people may think, my experience, and I can only speak from my experiences, but the army gave me loads of transferable skills and things that I can use in the outside world. And I'm not going to sit here and say that it's like the best option. But when I was joining, I was in a period of my life where I didn't really know where I was going. I mean, I was doing teaching assistant roles. I was doing unqualified teaching roles and cover supervisor roles for history and special needs. And I was just like, this isn't really going anywhere. And sort of, you know, open the door, this big sort of bastion of light from the army, like there's something I can do.
So sorry.
No, you go, please.
Yeah, I just, because I've got a background in teaching.
Yeah.
I'm thinking history degree, LSA, doing some unqualified teaching stuff. There must have been a reason why you didn't want to complete a teacher training course to become a teacher. Why?
I think that was also a bit of a, you know, I think that was probably also another fork in the road in my life at the time as well. It's the best way to describe it, really, you know, for lack of any better words. At the time, I was juggling with the idea of doing a full PGCE, and I really liked it, and I loved teaching, probably more than any role or job I've ever done, like in my life, because of the sense of satisfaction from seeing, you know, the kids opening their GCSE results on that one day. It all boils down to that one day, doesn't it? I know you know from your experience in teaching, that one day when they open their A-level envelopes, the GCSE envelopes, and they, you know, burst out in tears crying. It was great. It was lovely. It was the most fulfilling feeling that I ever had in any job, and I wanted to carry it on. But there was this itch at the back of my head that had been there since, like I was saying at the beginning, before I'd met you, when I was a little kid, sitting on the sofa watching my dad smoke a cigarette and talk to me endlessly about the Battle of Stalingrad or something random like that we're watching on TV, that itch just never got satisfied. I did the cadets when I was a kid. I loved it, and I was always like, my mum always told me that she thought that I had ADHD almost, because I was like bouncing off the walls, always wanting to move around and do things. Still are. There you go.
Maybe she was right.
Maybe she was, and maybe I should go for another checkup. Yeah, always wanting to keep moving and doing stuff, and like constantly doing things. And it just sort of, I spoke to my mum about it. I remember speaking to my mum, and she was like, well, I'm your mum. I'm obviously not going to be super happy that you want to go and join the army because you might end up being hurt. However, that being said, I think it's a perfect fit. And that really sort of shocked me. I was just like, oh wow, I didn't really think you actually thought like that. She said, yeah, it's a perfect fit because look at you, you're bouncing off the walls. Like half the time I feel like I should probably give you some Ritalin just to calm you down, sort of thing. And you've got the opportunity to join an establishment where you get to run around and get sweaty and play with guns, and almost like I am, like I say, it calls into question my level of maturity at the time, because I was just like, yeah, I wanted to do stuff that was really fun and exciting. And so it kind of essentially sort of cancelled out that PGCE, and became a bit of a no-brainer.
So you got trumped really by the itch.
Yeah, the itch just turned into a full-blown scratch that I needed to, absolutely go to town on.
And you're telling us you got this out of your system. You got the military out of your system now.
Well, it takes a lot longer to get it out. I mean, it sounds cheesy again, but it really is applicable. That whole idea and concept of you can take the man out of the military, but you can't really take the military out of the man. It's always going to be there, and it's taught me so much about myself, which is, in the context of this podcast, the idea of a journey. It's all about self-reflection, being able to make sure that you know the most that you can about you and your inner self and your capabilities. And I think that the army taught me so much about me. It highlighted and brought to the surface a million things that I never would have thought of. Like, had I not done it, I would have probably just been just another bloke in a cubicle, just tapping away and not really enjoying myself. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Russ.
No, I was going to ask you something you said that really interested me. So when you were young, basically, what I wanted to know is, when you were younger, why do you think that itch didn't kick in, like sort of at 18 after you'd done your A levels, or so you talk about that you've got a degree, so obviously assuming you went into university, did you go straight into university? And I think, because obviously some of our listeners will be young men, sort of also not knowing what they want to be doing, or women not knowing what they want to be doing, and they might want a little bit of insight into, so what was it that made you to pursue going and getting a degree? Because I've spoken in the first two podcasts about my own journey and how I decided for me, I didn't feel that I didn't have a clear direction of the career I wanted, and so that kind of took me off track of wanting to go to do a degree at university. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how comes you waited till you were 26? The army kind of tries to grab you when you're young, generally, doesn't it? And I actually even remember there was a point when I was lost. When we were 19, I was completely lost, and I even played with the idea, because I wanted to be a pilot, to join the the Air Force. So I'm just wondering, what was it that made you hold on to a little bit longer and not sort of itch that itch when it started?
So firstly, I did take a gap year. Yeah, I did. Just before or just after? I don't even remember. Would have been just before university. And I think the answer to that question, the overarching question of why didn't I go straight into it, comes from the gap year. So in the gap year, I went over to go and see my dad and my grandparents, who had, my dad had gone over there when I was 13, and he'd split from my mum when I was 13, and he'd stayed over there. And
there?
In the States, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I should have said that before. My family, I'm half American, so my family's from Washington, D.C. So he moved back to Washington, D.C. when I was 13, and I would go over there whenever I could in the summer holidays. And my gap year before university, after leaving A levels, after leaving college, 6 months of it was spent there, and 6 months of it was spent there doing a teaching assistant role in a rough American school. And so you see where I'm going with this, sort of like that concept and that idea of teaching, dug itself into my brain and shoved the concept of the army out to the side, essentially sort of put it in the basement for a bit. Again, sorry, excuse me, because I hadn't seen my father or really had regular contact with him since I was 13. We didn't have those conversations on the sofa talking about the military and talking about the Second World War and stuff like that. So that, with time, skill fade, goes away. That itch quells a little bit. And then I went over there on my gap year and went straight into teaching in the school. Immediately made me love teaching. I loved it. I remember the last time I was in America, in DC, the DC area, the tri-state area, I saw one of the kids that I taught that was like 7 or 8 at the time, and he was now like, I don't even know the math. My maths is terrible, but he was much older. And he saw me. I didn't know who the kid was. Or at least I didn't think I knew who the kid was. And he saw me and he was just like, Mr. Bowman, what are you doing? How you doing? And I was just like, who are you? And it shows the impact that you can have on a little kid who's not even double digits years old. And he remembers me when I go back there when I'm like 25. It's mad. It blew my mind, sort of thing. So, so like I said, you can see where I'm going here with this in terms of I went there 6 months on my gap year, spent doing teaching assistant roles, which made me come back, and then went to university. I did my degree. I specifically chose military history, contemporary military and international history, because there's the mesh, there's the joining right there of my two things.
That makes sense. So in a way, you were actually itching that.
I kind of was itching that itch, wasn't I? You see what I mean? So it's a double-edged sword. So I love teaching, and I'd sort of lit that fire in me to want to go and do teaching or help kids, while simultaneously going and doing a degree in something that scratched in part that itch of wanting to do everything military. And I know several friends of mine went straight into the army or into the military after they finished it, and I was like, I'm just going to give it a little bit of time because I was enjoying. You'll remember it clear as day. Like us, we were going about being young kids, just enjoying ourselves and doing like things that young kids shouldn't do, which we're not going to go into any details of on this call, on this podcast. Sorry, I wouldn't have thought. And I was just enjoying myself too much after I finished university. And then, as I said at the very beginning, the financial crash came in and gave us an economic slap around the face and put me down a couple of steps. So I needed to build myself back up to get rid of debt that I'd accumulated. And it just took a long time for me to get back onto my feet. And I got a bit more into teaching. And then that epiphany, that light bulb moment came that I talked about when I was sitting there. And then, along comes the sergeant and boom, I made my decision.
Yeah. Okay. So on that point, actually, so in comes this sergeant, and the whole purpose of this sergeant coming in many schools is to bring kids into the military. And let's just go back to school days for all of us and some of our listeners. At that age, you don't really have any idea whatsoever what your plan is for the next 20 years, let alone what you're going to be having for breakfast the next day. Mm-hmm. So it's quite interesting that our school system, society across the world, starts that young, trying to sort of, I wouldn't say brainwash, but trying to, give you an idea of, oh, look, here's this cool man who's come in and, telling you all about it, what it's like in the army and everything else. So it's quite interesting that actually you were the one that...
I was the one that got suckered in by it, so we said,
Yeah, well, not suckered in,
but that's the wrong word.
So what now, having been a teacher and having influenced, a lot of young people in your time while you were a teacher, what's your opinion on the way the schools try to sort of influence and do these career days? What's your opinion of them at such a young age? And
well, I think their heart's in the right place, certainly, because that's what a school is, and I know that you all know all about this, Steve, as well, from having such an extensive teaching background. The intent is it's got a bit of a golden intent in that sort of sense. They're trying to broaden your portfolio and your horizons and open your mind to a multitude of different possible career paths you can go down, little careers fairs they do in GCSE in schools and in colleges, just to give you as many options as you possibly can. And of course, with the concept of this journey where you focus a lot on young people and how things like apprenticeships can really be useful for them, I totally agree. In fact, I think for some of the skills required for some of the roles that you and your firm are currently doing, apprenticeships rather than degrees, or rather than going to these career fairs and sort of taking your pick and which one is the best of the bad bunch sort of thing. Mm-hmm. These apprenticeships are a million times better. You get stuck straight into the job, but it's different strokes for different blokes. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It really is. Like it's case by case dependent. So my opinion on sort of the school's influence from doing these career days and stuff like that is it's exactly that. It's my opinion. However, young people listening to this, or young people at career fairs, trying to make up their mind, I think it harps back to what I was saying before about how you need to make sure that you know exactly in yourself what it is that you want. But a lot of people at that age don't really know, so they need a bit of steering from people with experience. I think that's kind of the intent of having these career fairs, to bring people with experience in, to give them their story. I
think one of the things that I would like to add as an opinion on this is that there's this notion that when you're growing up that there's a career out there that you want to be, because historically people had usually one, often, occasionally two careers. Well, the world has changed so radically in the last 15, 20 years that, I mean, when I was working with young people in the early 2000s, you were talking about possibly 3 or 4 careers, because the world of work changes so rapidly.
Yeah.
And it's all about acquiring skills, and like you mentioned before, Buster, what kind of transferable skills have you acquired to be able to go from one line of work to another? So I think it's really important that people don't think that, want to be a pilot forever. Okay, maybe you do want to be a pilot, and that's great, but you might not want to be a pilot forever. And so, like your classic example of somebody that's talked about 3 careers in the space of 13 years.
Exactly.
And all interesting ones. And we haven't heard too much about the last career, the one that you're in now, and maybe we might not need to go into too much detail about that. But what's really coming through is how you have actually developed a range of skills, and you're pretty well qualified. I mean, you must have... Did you get A-levels as well?
Yeah, so GCSEs, A-levels. Degree,
yeah, so you've gone down a classic kind of educational pathway of getting your GCSEs, getting your A-levels, going to university. By the way, the universities that run military history courses, there can't be that many of them.
No,
where did you go?
My choices in 2006 were very limited. It was the University of Aberystwyth in Wales, which I almost immediately sort of turned around and went like, no, thank you. It was in the middle of nowhere. It was King's College London that required 2 A's and a B, and I was like, right, well, that's also a no-no, because I didn't perform very, very well in school. I was very, very average across the board. GCSEs, I never actually achieved an A in any academic exam in my life up until then. So King's, Aberystwyth, the University of Kent, or Salford in Manchester, in the heart of Manchester.
Is that where you went?
I chose the heart of Manchester. It's now my second favourite city in the whole damn country, second to London, to be honest. What a place. I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Oh, brilliant. I don't know where you want to go with this, Russell, but I'm picking up a bit of a theme here, just having interviewed 2 people.
Yep,
and here we got 2 incredibly bright young men, and you're still young men as far as I'm concerned, who have got some social and ethnic similarities, who, in my opinion, have underachieved at school in terms of academic qualifications. What's going on? Why is that? What we've heard about Russell's experience, teachers having less expectations of him than other kids, especially around, the issue of skin colour.
Yeah.
What was life? What kind of school did you go to?
So I was very fortunate in terms of I had grandparents. So my grandparents, both of the American grandparents from the black side of my family, they were, you'll understand what I'm trying to sort of explain here. They were big advocates. My grandfather was a genealogist. He was big on finding out about our cultural heritage and where we came from. He did loads of research into it, and he was an active member in the the civil rights movements in the 60s. I mean, he took my dad on his shoulders to the Martin Luther King speech in the I forgot what it's called, the big pool with the Washington Monument, where he said, I have a dream and all that sort of stuff. And my grandpa, I've got pictures of them standing next to white-only drinking fountains. You know what I mean? Things like that, just like you see from these pictures and from these films that you see on telly nowadays. And so that essentially made him adamant and set in stone that he wanted me or his kids, his grandkids, because my father went down a bit of an alternative path himself, so we tried to sort of circumvent my dad and go to his grandkids to make me and my sister excel. And so they saved up since the age of like 25 or something like that to send me to a good school. And so they actually ended up providing a sort of upfront subsidy to my mum to send me to a private school in Cobham called Reeds, which I also got onto with a bursary. So essentially I got put into, the best way to describe it is I got put into essentially took like a bunch of names of kids that couldn't actually afford the school or couldn't afford it fully, put them into a hat and kind of sort of pull one from it. So, and there was a certain quota of kids that they had to have come into each year, because the school used to be an orphanage, if I'm right. I mean, I'm a bit hazy. It used to be an orphanage way back in the day. And in keeping with some of those values, they onboarded a certain number of kids each year. And I was fortunate enough to get onto that in this bursary with some help, subsidised help from my grandparents, who were adamant that they wanted me and my sister to go to good schools and get a decent education. And then the flip side of that was that when I was at this school, and this is not in any way, shape or form like the main focus as to why I feel, some people would say that I didn't. My parents certainly didn't say that, and my family don't say that as well, but I personally feel like I kind of underachieved at school and didn't get the best results as I could, in part due to the uncomfort I felt of being surrounded by people that were significantly higher up, I guess, higher up in the food chain, the social food chain as me, if you understand what I mean.
So these are sort of class-based thing.
Almost kind of like that. Income's sort of me. I always had that insecurity, and there were a number of kids.
So what age is this that you?
So this was my secondary school. The primary school I actually don't really remember a lot of, to be honest with you. I really don't remember a lot of it at all. I can see a couple of teachers and a couple of old friends, but my secondary school is what I remember. But there's a second part to it, but I'll finish this bit first. So I felt kind of uncomfortable, and I always felt a bit out of place because I was in a place where I had to get the school bus and I couldn't really, I used to come back, and what was being shown on my sort of hard exterior was I'm not bothered by it. It doesn't bother me, sort of thing. But inside, a lot of things that I've discussed this with Russell and with all of our friends several times. I'm only coming to a period now in my life where I'm actually self-reflecting and understanding some of the insecurities and the emotional sort of baggage that I carry with myself. And when I was in school, I felt like I was sort of the odd one out. So in my year, I think, if I can remember correctly, there were about 4 kids of colour out of, I don't know, I couldn't even tell you, like 50, 60 people. There weren't a lot of us. So, and it was also in an environment where, these kids would come in their own, they've got their own cars, that some of them had houses with swimming pools and tennis courts and cars. And I'd go to these parties and I jumped on the train and went back to my house. It always just made me feel really anxious. And that stopped me from performing to the best of my abilities. Couple that with, as I said before, my dad left the year I started there. And it kind of threw me way off balance, really, sort of from an emotional perspective. And I didn't really think I never really thought I was going to address these issues. I always just sort of tucked them and brushed them underneath the carpet. And that stress and strain of having to have a long distance relationship with a father that has some additional background information that I won't really go into in much detail, but I'm sure you can probably guess from my tone of voice and the way I'm saying, is that he was a troubled individual who had a lot of personal mental health issues that he never addressed, and sort of what's the way of putting it, he cascaded it and reflected it onto us as a means of getting it getting out of his system rather than dealing with it himself. Hence one of the reasons why I had to go. So those 2 reasons are probably like the main reasons as to why I didn't really perform so well academically, coupled with me always bouncing off the walls, wanting to do something fun and never really paying attention in class because I was just a kid who was dealing with loads of stuff at home, but simultaneously, trying to perform at school to an expectation from my grandparents who were like, we're giving you some money. So it was a lot of pressure, I would have thought. I don't know if that...
No, that sounds quite compelling.
I've got a question. Obviously, so it was a private school, quite a very good private school.
Yeah, a very good one. Yeah.
So obviously, when you joined, you'd expect to have sort of the support that a young man who's you'd expect there to be more measures to sort of spot this troubled young man that might be going through things. That's come to the school, is sort of feeling slightly like an outcast almost.
Yeah.
And did they have these measures? Were they able to spot it? Did you get extra sort of, can we expect from private schools, that extra level of attention and detail that you would sometimes not get in a state school due to there being a lot more students?
Well, yeah, there's significant. You mean a lot more students in public schools, in normal schools?
In normal schools.
Yeah, of course, there was like half the amount of kids in the schools and the classes in mine, and yeah.
So how would the
remember.
teachers, because obviously you are a bright individual. So like there you are, you've arrived in school. It's a private school.
Yeah.
You've got there for a bursary plus, so you've been picked out the hat, as you said.
Yeah.
So like, how do you feel like you're being treated differently? Do you feel that you're kind of, from my perspective, sounds like you were underachieving? Were they not, highlighting this to your mom or to yourself? Were you getting any extra attention? Because you excelled in rugby. That was one of the things that sporting.
Yeah, I loved it, yeah.
I remember that was one of the things from going to that school that they did highlight you as, was your bread and butter. So what? Because I guess one of the things Steve and I am also very interested in is different journey. So you got someone who's gone to private school and someone who hasn't gone to private school, and there seems to be a common theme in terms of why there might have been some underachieving in that it wasn't picked up by the school or the teachers, and there doesn't seem to be any attention put on it for one reason or another. Are you able to? Do you know why?
Well, I mean, I can't think of the what's the word for it? Almost to put it into a word, sort of the counselling aspect of my school. I never actually went to go and see anybody about it. Any problems I had, I just sort of would sometimes speak to my mum, but about it. My sister was sort of very quiet about these sort of things as well. From the school, I don't really remember a whole lot of focus and attention on my home life or my family life from my teachers. It was all academia based, but it was, I think it probably came from the fact that I didn't want to talk about it either, to be honest with you. I didn't really want to talk about a lot of it because it was so fresh in my head, especially the first 2 years in that school, 13, 14, he'd just gone. And essentially the day he left, I went downstairs and said, right, I'm the bloke now. I'm the guy in this house now. My mum's told me this a couple of times. She said, like, the day after we went, I came downstairs and sat in the chair at the end of the table and said, right, whatever you need to discuss or do. I'm a 13-year-old kid, you know what I mean? I'm the man in the house sort of thing now, which kind of stuck. It's stuck because I've got a very strong relationship with mum. And because of that, a lot of listeners will probably feel or understand and relate to what I'm about to say, that at that age, a young, impressionable young man, right? His impersonation, or in his mind, a man, which I certainly wasn't yet, but a man, doesn't shed his feelings. He doesn't talk about these things to people. He just deals with it and he just cracks on. And that level of high-strung level of resilience just sort of kicked in immediately. And it meant that I never really spoke to anybody in my school about it. A couple of friends, yes, but I never really spoke to anybody about it, particularly from the teachers from that aspect, or from counsellor sort of aspect. And that's what I meant when I was saying to you before, Steve, about how I'm only really starting to realise this about myself since, over the past couple of years at the end of the army, and now that I've finally become a civilian and left the military again, and I'm having to take that army hat off and put on a civilian hat now and adhere to the big wide world, because I've been in my little army bubble for 5 years. It's making me realise some things. And one of those self-reflections is that when I was a kid from school, the reason why I probably stood out, or felt like I stood out, was because I was battling with it in my own head, trying to figure out how to be a bloke in my own head, which I never really got accustomed to or figured out. Yeah, I think that's probably the best way I can self-reflect on that.
Okay, so that all makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Somebody said something to me, a dear friend of mine recently, who was going through a bereavement, was that she felt, in terms of dealing with the loss and being able to talk about it, that she could only deal with so much pain at a time. And I thought that was a really telling comment, because it's not a gender thing. It's not being manly or womanly or anything like that. When you're suffering a loss or a bereavement of any type, and it's very painful, it takes time for you to process.
Oh yeah.
Especially if you're a very young person. I mean, Russell's taken years to start talking about his dad and that loss. And he had loads of really happy memories about that. So there was no real trauma apart from the trauma of the loss. It takes a long, long time. So on the one hand, I wouldn't expect anything else for a young person like you to be able to deal with it in that way. But what Russell was trying to get at, whether they were trying to, school was trying to understand what kind of barriers that you might have that would influence your learning going through that school.
Yeah.
Putting that to one side, what strategies did they have to support you to improve where you were at? And were they expecting the same as as any other kid in that school, especially a full-paying student? And this is not about picking out a particular school and trying to question their professionalism. It's about what happens when people of colour are going through the school system, because there seems to be some common threads here around, the level of teacher expectation.
Okay. So I've had a conversation a couple of times with my mum about some things that she remembers from primary school. So I'll start on that one. And she always had this sort of deep inclination and suspicion that there were, of course, racial undertones in a lot of the things that, my lack of achievement was then highlighted and reflected on from a racial aspect. There were several stories that she told me about how assumptions were immediately made and my treatment was different to that of other kids when I was in primary school. I never obviously noticed these things because I'm a young kid. I was just like, I don't see colour. I was just a little kid. And of course, I was growing up in a majority Caucasian environment. And one of my sort of mantras is always, people are products of their environment that they live in. And my environment was, what's the national statistics on it? Like about, let's just say 90% Caucasian or whatever it is, what the actual thing is. And that's what I'm surrounded by all the time. So I adopted that sort of type of mindset. And I never really saw colour in a primary school perspective. It wasn't until secondary school where you're asking about sort of, what strategy did the school have to improve me from an academic perspective in relation to the racial undertones that you've witnessed throughout the school systems. Secondary school was where I essentially witnessed and began to first realise and clock on to racism in that aspect. There were several kids in my school and in my year that would throw racial slurs at me. I remember playing rugby and other schools as well, because of course I was playing for this private school. We would play some of the top-notch schools in rugby when I was playing rugby. And I remember it's just these little things, but they stick in your mind forever, don't they? Do you know what I mean? I'm saying this now, and this is when I was 13, and I'm saying this now at 33. I can hear it clear as day in my head. I was playing rugby and my sister was there with my mum, and this kid from, I can't even remember which school it was, like a really top end school. I'd scored a try or something like that, or tackled him or done something to displease this man or this kid. And my sister was speaking, and then she was walking down the side of the touchline, and they were having, these two kids from this other school were having a conversation, and then sort of my sister said something quite loudly, like "Go Buster" or something like that. And these kids on the sideline were just like, who's that? And then one of the other kids said, like, that's the N-word sister. There you go. Do you know what I mean? Little things like that. I've been called every single word under the sun from that school.
It's interesting you call it little things, because these are really massive things.
Well, of course, yeah.
And they have a really incredible effect.
Yeah.
From what I know from talking to people who've experienced things similarly. So you veered us onto the experience of peer group racism.
Yeah.
And it might be too much for you to answer the question of how do you quantify whether the teachers in your school were willing you on to be the best type of academic that you could be, in the same way that they were willing other pupils who've come from more, let's say, advantaged backgrounds. it might be difficult for you to answer that question because, how do you make sense of that when you're a kid anyway?
Yeah.
But you have a feeling, don't you?
Yeah.
And that's what Russell talked about. He had a feeling that he wasn't being pushed. Did you have that feeling that you weren't being pushed?
Yes and no. Essentially, that's my direct answer in one sentence. Yes, in that some teachers did. Some teachers did. My cousin now works at the same school that I worked. That I went to. My cousin is now a biology teacher at that school, and she gave me a picture. I can't even remember when it was, like a year ago or so. A picture of me with the kids that I played rugby with, and she said, "This is a present from your old history teacher. He still remembers you clearly to this day." And I remember him so well, vividly. He was such a great guy.
No, we're laughing. Russ and I are laughing because it's like story Mark II, isn't it?
Is this like a repeat sort of thing, isn't it? But there were certain teachers that did certain things that were like inspiring to me and were, as you say, egging me on to get better and better and better. And lo and behold, surprise, surprise, the teachers that did actually instill a bit of trust in me in these sort of aspects, I excelled in those areas. Like, I remember I thought when I was going to go and do A-levels, the concept of doing the concept of doing a science A-level, not a chance. Not when I was doing my GCSEs. One teacher in particular was such an inspiring guy, so funny and so engaging that I was like, do you know what? I'm going to do biology for my A-levels. I subsequently got a D, but it was one of those things. It was kind of like the same as maths. I remember doing maths when I was a kid, or when I was doing GCSEs. I loved maths, but I was terrible at it. And I loved biology, but I was terrible at it. And those sort of innocent, try-hard people that were just like, yeah, I really want to do it, and I really want to understand this. It's not going in. But that's just, I'm veering off a little bit. But that particular incident for biology, the history teachers, there were some other teachers that were really, really, really good at inspiring me and remember me to this day and kept on pushing me to perform academically. And then I said, the answer is yes and no. The other side is pretty much exactly the polar opposite. There were several teachers that, as you say, you knew something was off. They didn't really quite speak to you in the same way that they spoke to other students, and especially towards my GCSE times. That, like I said, there was only about 3 or 4 people of colour in my year, not that many in the entire school at all, and you just had this little feeling that they weren't really putting in half the amount of effort into you as they were others. Now, if that's because of just racial undertones, I couldn't tell you, because no teacher in their right mind, unless they wanted to get fired, would come straight out and say something like that to you. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. It might be slightly different in Kenya, but in Kenya, it's a predominantly black environment. But
to be fair, I didn't experience anything like that in Kenya.
Well, exactly. So that goes to show the differences in cultures and in opinions.
I know what you're saying, though. You're trying. You can't put your finger on it.
Yeah,
you can't put your finger on it. And look,
there's no way I can say in a sentence.
Look, these things happen in the educational system in all types of schools, private, public.
Yeah.
Some this is not. This is not a system problem as such, in the sense that you could say private schools like this, state schools like that.
No, I completely agree.
Most schools have their own character, and you'll find that some schools are really excellent at advancing achievement for kids from all types of backgrounds. I mean, when I went to secondary school in 1968, I went into the top form of one of the new comprehensives, and I'd never been taught chemistry. I'd had 2 lessons of chemistry, and the teacher said to me, and so I'm a white boy now, and she says to me, son, you'll never be any good at chemistry. And I'd had 2 or 3 lessons in it. And he was right. I never got anywhere good at chemistry, but that label that he put on me when, at the age of 11, triggered what some people might understand as a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you don't expect me to do well and you tell me I can't, then when I'm at a young and impressionable age, it's very unlikely that I will, unless you've got the character like someone like Russell, or maybe yourself, where you'd say, I'm not having that label. I'm going to turn that label round. But for me, that didn't do my confidence in science any good. And I stayed completely away from the sciences all the way through my education.
I just had a bit of an insight. What I find quite interesting is obviously you went to a private school, a good private school. Obviously, I went to a public school, and there seems to be a theme that it's not actually the school, whether you go to a private school or public school. It's about the connection that you have with a teacher, whether that teacher sort of inspires you, whether you tend to excel in a subject or work in it, and I guess that also transcends to what I was asking earlier with when someone comes into school for careers day. I guess it's that connection that determines whether you're going to be interested in that career or
your enthusiasm. You don't. A lot of people, Steve, you know this full well. Your enthusiasm and the phrase "first impressions count" has never been more applicable to someone like a teacher. Like, first impressions really, 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 really do count. Like, you are literally imparting your knowledge and pressing your passion, your love for your subject onto a kid that hasn't got any clue about what it is. So if you do it in a crappy way, they're going to think it's crap. Yeah. But if you go straight in head first, like, this is awesome, you need to know this because of this, X, Y, Z, this is so awesome, you're going to love it, it pumps them up. Yeah. And I had several teachers, history, my biology teacher, even in a subject that I was terrible at, but I still remember him, clear as day. And then if you were to tell me to name off my physics teacher or I don't know, like one of my PE teachers or something, I wouldn't be able to tell you. I honestly wouldn't be able to tell you, because I'm not the PE teacher, actually, no, because I love rugby, but maybe the one that made me play cricket, I wouldn't have a bloody clue. But I wouldn't remember him at all. So it's all about not just your first impressions, but keeping up the momentum as a teacher. And it harps immediately straight back to what you said about how it's not about the school. I'm not here to sit here and say public schools, private schools, grammar schools, any of them are better than the other. They're all education systems. It's not about the places, it's about the people. And the people that occupy that establishment are the ones that make those young people, they're the most impressionable young people. It make or breaks like what they want to do in life. In Kenya, in the UK, in 1968, in 2003, whenever. Yeah. It's a flat out across the board.
Okay. Well, look, that was an amazing sort of going backwards through your own journey. Just quickly, I wanted to, if you don't mind, just touch on something. So we were talking just a little bit about, the racial undertones that you experienced in school. So if we kind of like fast forward back to where you are now, right, on that theme, if you don't mind. Okay. Anything else that comes up, please, throw it into the ring as well. But so we're at school, go to university, then we go to America.
No, America was before, so it was school, America, gap year.
What was it like in America for that little quick period?
For 6 months.
Yeah, for the 6 months.
Mate, it was mad. I remember, I can remember my first day there, and I've actually genuinely not been. There's been few instances where I've been really that like scared, that shook of like walking into a place, because this is a predominantly black. There was one white kid in the school that I was working in, and he was the most nuts guy. I'm not even joking. Like, he had to be.
So how did they take to you? Obviously, young black British
basically,
male.
I think it was all a little bit, because I was in the middle school bit, so I was in the how old were they? I think it was like 11 to 15 or something. I wasn't quite high school, but it was all in one big building, 3-tiered building. Yeah. So they all at lunchtime or wherever, they all congregate outside. So you had the 18. I'm 19, right? I'm teaching. There are some kids that have been held back a year that are older than me, that are still in the school, and I'm a member of the faculty. Imagine that, ponder me that for a second, and I walked in there, and I think what immediately stopped me from looking like an absolute nutter, made me look like a nutter, and stopped me from being approached in a negative fashion from your stereotypical sort of American high school way, was my voice. Because as soon as I spoke, they were just like, who the hell are you? I was just like, you're right, mate, I'm Carter, I'm from England, I'm a support assistant for the little year 7s upstairs. And they were just like, what? You know what I mean? They were so surprised, taken back. They were just like, oh my, that whole concept of like British people, cup of tea, how's your mum, all that sort of stuff. Like, not gonna lie, I definitely used that to my advantage, but it helped break me off from being sort of a target.
Okay, and then we go back, we go to university.
You had that, and then university came out with living with you, actually, if you remember, for several years. So
I think we're going to need another episode for you. I had a feeling before we got you on, but no, it's definitely going to need another episode.
So
but
it was just different jobs, and then teaching, and then the army. 2015, and then
okay, so the army.
Yeah,
let's talk about the army.
Right?
Is it how was it when you first get there? So Carter Bowman IV. By the way, you haven't told your listeners that we've got our fourth Carter Bowman here.
We'll do that on the next episode, mate.
Yeah, definitely. So you arrive at the army. You're going for your training.
Yeah.
What was, obviously we've talked about what your expectations were from that side of things, but what about on the racial side? Like how was it? Was it similar to? Would you say it's similar to school, or was it a different level? Was it?
It was.
Was there any?
I mean, yes, of course there always is. Everyone's got that sort of idea that the army's like racist in their head. It's just like racist, and I wouldn't sit there and label the army as racist, not in any way, shape, or form. Or at least not from my perspective, because I joined a very bespoke and niche department. My regiment is one of the smallest regiments in the army, separate. It's a very niche area of entering in. So I can't speak for the experiences of the infantryman, the medic, the engineer. You've seen it in the news, we've seen it everywhere. There are racial undertones within the army. Of course there are. It's a draconian society with very, very, very old rules. There's going to be some serious brushing under the carpet of some racial things that happened there. From a personal perspective, by the time I got to there, and by the time I'd gone through training and batted off and absorbed all of the cliche sort of crappy, ignorant racial statements that people might make, like, oh, I don't even know I can't even pull an example up, but young 18-year-old kids with me, a 26-year-old man, and they're just being idiots, ignorant idiots. And I sort of immediately identified that as just ignorance. But when I got into the army itself, into my unit, I didn't really experience a lot of it firsthand per se. There were incidents that I saw, but they weren't directed. Nothing was ever directed at me. And if it was in a joke fashion from people that were close to me, which I then sort of dumbed down. And I know that might come across in a negative fashion to some people listening that think like you have to stand up and address it if it's a joke or not.
Yeah. But
the environment that I was in, I had to take it on the chin.
So just quickly, obviously we're quite similar, I dare say, in the approach to how when we've experienced racism in the past, we kind of, I don't know if it's a thicker skin or
it's a joke to me,
or having. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a joke to me, but I kind of like don't waste any energy on addressing
That's what
it. I guess
I don't mean like a funny joke, haha. I mean like if you're being serious, then you are. It is.
Do you think that's because from a very young age, I'm comparing our experiences that we experienced it from a young age, so it's not necessarily something that you take it seriously, or because no one was taking it seriously back then, you kind of just accept it as part of society, as part of the life, part of growing up, from your perspective?
Hey, I think that I got called every name under the sun by many people when I was younger, and it got to the point where it was, like you said, I think personally, it did just thicken my skin to the point where anything that sort of came at me was kind of like a rubber bullet and it just bounced off like a paintball. Do you know what I mean? I was just like, whatever, man, you're an idiot. Like whenever people would say, but I make a clear distinction between someone saying that jokingly, and of course I hark back to saying, you should always stand up and call it out when it's done, even if it's a joke from close friends. But my closest friends, me and you, we've bantered back and forth, from time to time. We all have. Everyone has, in the privacy of their own little domiciles, their own homes, with their close friends. But I know when someone's being serious, and when they are being serious, that's when I call it out. And I've only had to call it out a handful of times in my life. And then, 9 times out of 10, it's just been like, do one, mate. You're a moron. I'm now no longer going to ever interact with you ever again because you're clearly just ignorant as hell. So I think, from a personal perspective, it's a thickening of the skin that's developed over years and years and years of hearing the same.
Yeah, I think
stuff.
I agree. Okay, and then so moving on to your current role. At Barclays.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think we'll probably end on that note, and definitely get you back for another podcast.
Cool.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Happy with that.
So do you now feel at Barclays, I think they've got a diversity policy, you know, things have moved on quite a long time from any of the other sort of...
from the old days sort of thing.
Yeah, any of the other, what's the word I was looking for? I was about to say societies, establishments that you've come out of school, other workplaces. So how do you feel there? Do you
with the same sort of undertones we were talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, well, Barclays is very... I'm actually working, because I work in communications, so I actually do a lot of these surveys. So a lot of my work revolves around listening and looking and analysing the metrics and the data surrounding surveys from a diversity and inclusion perspective. So I look at how we can communicate out to colleagues across the bank and across particular functions, how we can increase readership and awareness for colleagues to become allies and partners of these multicultural networks. I'm part of the Black Professionals Forum in Barclays itself, which is a small part of the Embrace Forum, a small snippet within a larger network called the Embrace Network that encompasses every race, colour, creed, type of person, whatever you want to say, under the sun, like everything. And it's and Barclays has got a very, and I can say that genuinely, they genuinely do have like a strong standing when it comes to cultural and diverse and rich diversity within the bank. They're pushing it very, very strongly, and they are, because studies have shown from Barclays, they've released these figures quite a few times. Studies have shown from a corporate perspective that having a diverse portfolio and pool of colleagues to draw from, and to have within your company increases the company's performance by X%. I don't know the percentage, but whatever increase is exactly that, an increase in performance. So it makes the company better to have more women in senior leadership positions, to have more diverse cultures and black and white,
to be fair,
Asian people.
That's something that Russell Hewes Limited, RH, we're very, very proud of. The diversity in the company with women, different cultures, ethnicities,
and it's
something I'm very, very proud of. And actually, it's one of the main reasons I feel that we're constantly evolving and we're constantly growing at a very, very rapid speed. It's something I'm very proud of, the company's very proud of, and something that I'm definitely going to share on other podcasts and talk a lot more about. Yeah,
I mean, like it's critical to maintaining a decent sort of output from these big companies to have. They've all come into the realization that making sure that your company is as diverse and enriched with different cultures, but also with different types of people from different backgrounds, which is one of the main reasons, one of the big reasons why Barclays is pushing ahead with things like the AFTER program, so the military veterans program. People didn't realize that veterans and people, we've got great stakeholder engagement skills and soft skills. We just need to be taught the technical ones. And then for the technical ones, they can go and find people from university. And then you just end up with this pool of just every colour, race, creed and kind of people, which does nothing but improve performance. So from that aspect, from a large corporation, sort of corporate aspect, yes, they cover all the bases, they tick all the boxes in that aspect. And then when you start getting further down the food chain, so to speak, to a company like yourself, people are now realising that diversity is
top of the
crucial.
food chain, mate. Don't know what you're on about.
Sorry, I mean in terms of the size, sheer size of the company. Nice.
Yeah, Russell's not quite listed in the FTSE.
Yeah, he's not.
Yeah. Watch the space.
Yeah, but it might happen very soon. Yeah. So that's a really good way to end, isn't it?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of challenging experiences that both of you have gone through, but to hear that you've got a company that is incredibly well represented in terms of its diversity in London, and you're working for a company that's incredibly well represented. Off camera, we can probably talk about how many really senior leadership positions are held by people of colour within the bank, but that's another conversation.
I was about to say something there. Yeah.
So yeah, that for me was a very fascinating conversation, Russell.
Thank you very much, Carter Bowman IV, my guy.
You're welcome, mate.
Thank you for coming in. And yeah, I think for me that's just shown, this is your first guest, on the Journey podcast, and dare I say we'll have thousands of episodes hopefully, because I feel like every individual, doesn't matter what sort of background or what job they currently do or what they hope to do, what age they are, what culture, for me it just shows that everyone's got a story to tell, and and yours as well is very inspiring, and I'm sure there's some young man or young girl out there that's young ladies that's going to be really inspired to hear that story, and hopefully be able to give some insight into either a friend or family about some future decisions. And that's really what I hope that this podcast can bring to people.
That's the main aim.
That's the main aim for me, really just giving insight, and also giving an opportunity for other people to share the podcast. I'm sure we'll have some famous names on here in the future, but for me this is a podcast for everyone, every race, creed, gender, and hopefully we can give some more insight. And thank you very much, Steve, once again.
Loved it. Thank you
for coming in. We went a little bit over time this time, but I think it was well worth it, and look forward to having you back again, Buster.
Back. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. All right. And yeah, please, guys, please share comments. Either leave them on Instagram. I just found out that Spotify doesn't allow you to leave comments, but YouTube. We're on Apple as well, iTunes. You can leave comments, or come onto my own website if you want to share anything. If you want to hear about a certain career, or would like us to explore, someone else's life, please, or would actually be interested on coming on the show yourself. Really want this to go as far as possible. Thank you once again. Over and out.
Thank you.